Teacher educators from around the country are gathering in Newcastle this week to have a long, hard look at a sector which has taken quite a hit in recent years, a hit in numbers and really in perception as well. Teaching has been plagued by shortages, by burnout among those already in the profession, with clashes with government over wages, over conditions. All of these things have been playing out on the broad canvas of teaching our kids, teaching the next generation. So with that in mind, what is the future of teaching? Because that ultimately impacts on all of us, leading from this generation into the next, through our children, through our grandchildren. Well, the University of Newcastle is hosting this 3-day Australian Teacher Education Association conference. And today you'll meet one of the speakers, indeed the keynote speaker, who has come all the way from the UK. But before speaking at the conference, Clare Brooks joins us here on ABC Newcastle and ABC Upper Hunter. Clare is a professor in education at the University of Cambridge. Clare, good morning to you.
Morning, Scott. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Welcome to Newcastle and thanks for making time.
No, it's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to talk to you.
Now, I doubt our teacher woes that I was just outlining in the introduction make it all the way into the UK news, but in the short time you've already been here, what have you gleaned about some of the challenges that teachers face here?
Well, I think you'd be surprised to hear, Scott, that actually we are quite familiar with the situation in Australia, predominantly because so many of our teachers are leaving education in England, particularly leaving the state sector in England, in order to come and work in Australia to fill some of your gaps.
Oh dear.
And that's partly because you pay teachers more than we pay them in England. You give them much better working conditions, and you also have a much nicer climate for them to work in than we can offer them way back home.
That would come as a surprise, not the climate bit, Clare, but the first two aspects you've raised, because we're hearing so much here about how underpaid teachers are and how terrible the conditions are in the classroom and beyond for those already in the classroom or contemplating going into the classroom. So do our teachers comparatively have it pretty good?
Well, I think in terms of pay, they certainly do. We're hearing lots of stories about teachers leaving the system in England to come over here and are getting paid nearly twice as much as they're being paid back home. But the issue, I don't think, is necessarily about the pay differential between the UK or between England and Australia. It's about the pay differential between teaching and other similar professions. So it's about the choices people have about the kinds of careers that they want to pursue. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that teachers are coming to Australia, because I know when I was younger, some of my peers were heading over to the UK. They were attracted there to go into teaching. Is it a case of, in the teaching profession, as it is in most aspects of life, the grass is always greener?
I'm not so much sure about that. I think teaching is an incredibly challenging, incredibly rewarding, but an incredibly challenging profession. And particularly since the pandemic, we've seen schools have become quite challenging places to be. Teaching has become an incredibly challenging job. We're finding in England, and I'm sure the situation is very similar here, 1 in 5 of our teachers say that they're stressed most of the time. 80% of our teachers say that high stress is being created by a lot of additional workload. They're citing increased bureaucracy, increased demands around data management. All of that is actually making teaching not a terribly attractive profession if you've got options, if you've got choices. There are other things that you can do. We're certainly finding that young people who want to make a difference, who actually want to go out and do something positive in society, are really attracted by the idea of becoming a teacher. But once the reality is in the classroom, they find it enormously difficult to stay. And I think that's the same in England and in Australia, and actually in many countries around the world.
Here in New South Wales, Clare, the state government has been offering a sign-on bonus of $20,000. And there's also relocation support to get people to travel to and put roots down in regional areas. And yet many regional schools are still struggling to fill vacancies. I think it was about 1,000 vacancies across the state as of May. So is money not the answer then? Even though we've been talking a lot about money and comparative incomes, is money not the answer?
Oh, I think, don't get me wrong, I think money is important, and there's no way that I'm going to suggest that, teachers shouldn't get a decent salary for the work that they do. But I think you also have to look at education in the round. So, for example, some of the proposals for reform, some of the ways in which teacher education they're suggesting they might reform teacher education, they're very similar to the reforms that we've experienced in England. We experienced them, they went into effect in 2021, and we've had a process of accreditation, which is quite similar to the one that's being proposed here. And the result of that is actually we found that our rural areas have been further disadvantaged through that accreditation process. And the places that have won have been the urban centres, and particularly urban centres like London, which traditionally don't have a great deal of problem attracting people to the region because of it being the city that it is. But it's the rural regional communities that are finding it even more challenging to become a teacher and to remain being a teacher.
Claire, in your area of study, not only have you got blackboard experience, so to speak, you were a teacher, but now in the world of academia, you look at broader issues, the social consequences, I guess, of school, of education. So in some respects, I guess, how the school fits into a community. What more does the community need to do? Do members of the broader community need to show to not only attract teachers, but to ensure the school is a thriving part of the community? It's not just a place where you send your kids off to learn.
No, absolutely. And what we're experiencing again at home is that some of the things that are happening in society, the increase in concerns around mental health and social well-being, those concerns are really finding their way into the school. And we've been through a period of austerity in England where there's been decreased funding for that kind of social support. And that's really affecting the schools because all of those problems are being manifest in the schools. And the teachers don't really have the capacity to deal with the scale of the problems that we're experiencing. So we're seeing this as a much bigger issue. It's much bigger than just education. It's also about how we're taking care of our societies and how we're looking after people that are still struggling as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah, so here you are in Newcastle, bringing some of your experience, and you'll be the keynote speaker at the conference. What's the subject you're going to be talking about? What are you going to tell them?
Well, one of the things that I want to share with them is the experience that we've had in England. As I said, we're a little bit further down the line than you guys are in terms of the reforms that are being proposed. We've been through the accreditation process. It hasn't been a good experience. It's really adversely affected, as I said, the regions that need teachers the most. What we've also experienced is that there's been an increase in the demand in terms of the content of teacher education programs. And don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against content. Of course, we need our teachers to know about the best ways in which young people learn. But the issues that we've experienced is that it's not the right sort of content that teachers are getting. One of the things that we know is that for teachers to be prepared in the classroom, for teachers to feel that they're really good at what they're doing, they need two things. They need to have a repertoire of approaches and strategies and techniques, things that they can do in the classroom. And they also need to have a reservoir of understanding and knowledge, things that they can draw upon when the repertoire stops working. And what we found with our reforms is that it's all about the repertoire, it's all about teacher behaviours, technical aspects of teaching. And that's fine in the first instance, but when that stops working, teachers really need to have a deep reservoir of understanding and knowledge that they can draw upon. So one of the things I'm hoping to share with colleagues is which bits of the reform process have worked, reduced timetables for new teachers, that appears to have worked. giving them consistent mentoring support in the first 3 years. That appears to have worked. But prescribing content, that really appears not to have worked at all. And going through an accreditation process, that really doesn't feel as though that's worked terribly well in England.
Well, Claire, whatever you can bring from across the seas to help us retain our teachers and attract new ones here, and that way we'll stop taking all your teachers, that would be great.
That sounds like a good deal, doesn't it? Let's do that.
Thanks so much for making time to speak with me here.
Thanks, Scott.
Good on you.
Thank you. Bye.
Professor Clare Brooks, Professor of Education from the University of Cambridge, here sharing her knowledge. If you're a teacher, if you've been a teacher, you may have some thoughts yourself, especially after hearing Claire talk there. Share them here, 0487 99 12 33. Up next, with the Olympics approach.